Alrighty, hello boys and girls. We are here to do some more editing. We're going to use both Lightroom and Photoshop today. And what brought this subject up was I was recently doing an online webinar for a camera club in New Jersey, and we were doing an edit to an image kind of like this. And the question came up, since I had done this in Photoshop, why didn't I just use Lightroom to fix the perspective issues in this image? And I thought that's a good question. So that's what we're going to examine. I'm going to take you through two different images, and we're going to see what Lightroom can do with perspective and where it falls down. So let's go ahead. So I've already done some basic edits to this image, just fix the shadows, highlights, and colors and stuff. Now let's deal with the perspective. So I could just come down to transform. And in the transform panel, if I take the vertical slider and push it off to the left, we can see what happens. It will start to straighten the image. And generally, again, if you just kind of look at it with your eye, and if this, I'm looking at this right wall here, if that looks straight, then chances are it is pretty good. Now there is a thing here called the Constrain Crop. I can do that, and we could be done. In fact, let's go ahead and do some more cropping. I'm going to bring it down from the top because there's way too much sky. Let's say I want some more of a panoramic feel here. And you can see it got all it could. Because here's what happens in Lightroom. When it does a perspective fix, it compresses the image. So the stuff that was down here gets moved up to fix the perspective that's happening way back here. So what that means is we're losing some of the foreground. All right. So just that distance is going to change. Also, separate from that, we have the shadow of the barn heading over here, and it's going to be kind of right up against the crop. And because of that, I'm worried that if this thing gets printed and matted, that this shadow here is going to cause a visual split between the image. But it is what it is. Let's hit OK. And let's go to Effects, and we'll add a little bit more vignette. And we could say we're done. In fact, let's just do a complete virtual copy of this. I'm going to reset this one. So that's actually how the image started. And that's where it ended up. Certainly a heck of a lot better. However, could we get a little bit more out of this image? And I think the answer is going to be yes. So I'm going to grab our edited image right here. I'm going to do another virtual copy of it, Command apostrophe. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get rid of the vignette. Whoops, wrong one. Double click on that title. I'm going to get rid of the crop. We'll put it back to as shot. And I'm going to get rid of the perspective fix by just double clicking on transform. And then again, our crop is going to be as shot. Okay. So here's our original image with the edits as done in Lightroom. Now let's bring this image into Photoshop. All right, so here's our image opened up in Photoshop. And again, rule of thumb, first thing, duplicate the background, Command or Control J, so we have a copy. Okay, so here we have the same perspective issues. I am concerned a little bit about this shadow coming way over to the edge. In fact, we zoom in here, zoom in here, you can see that it's right up against the edge. And I really would like to have a little bit more room to play. So I'm going to back off on the zoom. I'm going to do a little trick here. We're going to use the cropping tool. And by the way, something on the menu is locked in place now until you click on this thing. And also, if you want it to be a single row instead of a double row, you can just do that. So this little thing that's underneath the X is what allows you to move the toolbar if you want a little closer to your image. All right, so I have my rulers already up. What I'm going to do is first I'm going to drag from the left-hand edge so I have a guideline so I can see what straight up and down is. And then I'm going to do the same thing right over in here. All right, but let's go to the crop tool, which is C. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit off to the right of the image. I want about this much. And it's just going to fill it with white because white is currently the color in the background. So we'll hit enter on that and we have this area. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, select about that much. And we're going to use one of my favorite tools in Photoshop, Content Aware Scale. Hold down the Shift key because I just want it going in one direction, and I'm going to drag this off to the right. Now, the shadow, of course, came with it, but we're going to fix that. So could I just delete it? Well, no, because that would just be white. So I'm going to come zoom way in here, and I'm just going to get the stamp tool or the clone brush, put it at 100%, and I'm just going to, actually, you know what? Let's make it easy. Let's get the lasso tool. We'll just drag around the whole thing here. Function Shift F5 for content aware fill. Let's put content aware in there. Hit OK. That gets rid of that. And this was a little bit of an angle coming in. So now we'll use the stamp tool for that. Click over here, deselect, and then just going to smudge it up a little bit. In fact, let's make it a softer edge brush. Bring down the opacity to about 50% so we don't have this such a sharp image on the shadow. And we'll do something like that. Okay, so we back off. Okay, so now you can see what we did was we added area so that the shadow is shorter and it's not going to cause that visual break in the image. Okay, well, we still have our perspective to deal with. So let's back off on the zoom a bit. We don't need the rulers anymore, so we can get rid of those. And I'm going to hit Command T or Control T in a Windows machine. And what we need to do is we're going to drag these corners, but you can't just drag it because that just changes the size. That's not going to work. You have to hold down the Command or Control key and then click on a corner and drag, and watch, I can just drag the side of the barn until it's straight. But what ends up happening is you end up getting in a little bit of tug of war because when you pull off to the right, well, the left comes with you. So let's take that, we'll drag that back the other way. Oh, that's better, but now the right needs to come a little bit more as you see what's going on here. Also, when you do this, it compresses vertically. So let's just hit enter for now. And see, now we have a nice straight barn. And the advantage of doing this in Photoshop is Photoshop adds, it expands the image where Lightroom contracts. So if we had anything very interesting here in the foreground, which we don't, but if we did, then it would be maintained. You wouldn't have to worry about cropping it because of that perspective shift in Lightroom. That said, let's just turn this on and off and you can see, well, the barn shrunk. So let's make the opacity about 50% or so. And now you can see, look, there's where the top of the barn was. So let's bring the rulers back, which is, again, Command or Control R. We'll put a line right where the top of the barn was. Change our opacity back to 100%. Command T to transform. Hold down the Shift key, and now we're just going to drag it up. So the barn is the original height of what it was supposed to be, and then we can hit enter. There's our transform. Now we can get rid of our rulers, clear our guides under view. And again, we started there, and now we have a nice straight barn, but you can see we didn't lose anything. In fact, we actually added a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and save this to put it back into Lightroom. So here's our two images. I'm going to go ahead and here's our Photoshop image that we straightened out in Photoshop, and you'll see over on the right hand side that we gained a little bit of area here. I'm going to highlight the Lightroom one, and I'm going to synchronize just the crop. So let's say check all and add crop here, and we'll make the Photoshop image cropped like the Lightroom one. In fact, let's fix our crop because we have more. But we'll keep the aspect ratio, and we'll get our full foreground. Okay, so we can now apply our vignette so that they match there. And now let's highlight the two of them. We'll go full screen. So there's our Photoshop crop, and again, you can see we've got room beyond the shadow. I did make the shadow a little heavy. You can soften that edge a little bit. And then here's the same image done in Lightroom. It's not a huge difference for this image. Again, because there's nothing going on in the foreground, we just add a little bit more on the right. So here's one that probably worked pretty well in Lightroom, and you would not really have to go into Photoshop, with the exception of if this thing bothered you and you want to make sure you had that little bit of extra room. Now, that said, let's take a look at an image that doesn't work quite as well in Lightroom that we're going to have to go into Photoshop with. So let me go out of full screen and bring up this image of some lighthouses, or a lighthouse. This is Nauset Light in Cape Cod. I see a spot that's bothering me right there. So let's get rid of that first. All right, so we obviously have perspective problems here. Let's see if Lightroom can fix it. So again, I'm going to create a virtual copy, so I've got one to play with, and we have our original that is unphased. All right, so transform again. Now let's try the vertical thing. So we do our vertical until we see what looks like the lighthouse straight. And watch what happens. A problem starts to happen. If you go too far, it starts to expand vertically. See what happens? So you have to kind of go as good as you can. Also, we have the building next to it to deal with. And that does a pretty good job. So we'll go ahead and use the Constrain Crop on this image. Oh, but look what happened. We lost so much of the bottom that's not going to work at all. There's no base to the image. So let's undo that. And now we'll bring up the crop tool and we will manually crop. Got to open up our lock there in the crop. Bring this up just to there. And then left and right. Now there's obviously, again, way too much sky. In fact, I don't like that bench there. That's going to go. And let's bring this down. All right, and we can see that it's pretty good, but it's still not quite right. You can see there's still a slight lean, both on the lighthouse and the building. Let's see if we back off on the transform a little bit. Will that help? Yeah, maybe we did come a little too far. Maybe about right there. Okay, that is doable. However, take a close look at the lighthouse, and you can see if I'll bring up the crop tool. You can see that line. Notice here the back where the walkway hits the back of the lighthouse versus here. Notice the difference there. So there's still a perspective issue there. If we bring this up higher, you'll see that the top railing edge, which is right here, should also be right there. So that's off. The building's pretty good. The foreground, nothing's going on there. So that is one of the limitations. Lightroom just can't do anymore. And we'll go ahead and just put in our little vignette. Okay, so, it's passable. It's not a huge deal. This perspective bothers me a little bit. The building itself here is okay. Let's go ahead and take this into Photoshop and see the differences. So again, Photo, Edit in Photoshop. All right, so here's our image in Photoshop again. Command J to duplicate that, and let's see now what we can do. Rather than affect the entire image, I have the lighthouse and the house separately. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start with the lighthouse since it's the greatest offender. Again, I'm going to bring up the rulers. I want a couple of guidelines. I want this thing to be straight up and down. Obviously it isn't. In fact, I'm going to put some guides on either side. And also we have the problem with the top of the lighthouse where those weren't matching either. So let's go ahead and put a line there as well. And what I'm going to do is get the lasso and draw around the lighthouse. And I'm going to hit copy, Command C, Command V. And if we look now, there's the lighthouse all by its lonesome. And let's zoom in a bit so we can see what's going on here. So now instead of using transform, we're going to use the warp tool. So we're going to go to Edit, Transform, Warp. So here's our image, and look, I can just start dragging it, the different pieces of it, to get it to straighten out. Now that top is off a bit. Let's go ahead and bring in from the right. I want to get the top straight up and down. I'm going to do the same thing down the bottom. We're going to straighten that out a little bit. I'm also going to click here and lift it up so that we can get these two things lined up. Right that edge where it comes around. And got to do the same thing over here. I need to move the top over a little bit more. And now I need to move the bottom in. In fact, let's just scrunch it in there. And that way. All right. Now I think I've made our lighthouse a little too skinny, although now it is perspective-wise it's correct. So let's do that. Let's just make it skinny for a second. But now we've got, if you see our lines, now that's straight. And now the top of the railing up, not quite there. Let's bring that up a little bit. And that's looking pretty good. Yes, there's a break in the cloud. We'll get to that shortly. Okay, let's hit enter on there. And now if we turn the rest of the image off, you can see we have a nice straight lighthouse. There are breaks around the clouds though. And also our lighthouse got a little skinny. So we need to hit, now we hit the transform tool, hold down the shift key, and I'm going to drag it over until I see this brush here line up with the brush that used to be there. So let's just drag that out to there. And the left side, actually the left side's pretty good right there. So good, now that lines up. Let's get rid of our guides because we can see that it's straight. So we'll clear the guides. But we have a problem with the clouds no longer match up. So let's put a mask on this layer. So add a mask. We'll get a black brush and we're going to work it about 80%. So I hit 8 on the keyboard to give us 80. And I'm just going to start where I can see these breaks. I'm just painting with black over top of these breaks. And look, it all magically disappears. And now I can turn this on and off. You don't notice the breaks in the brush that much. I could actually come in here too. There we go. So now, there we go. We have our dancing lighthouse. Look how far off that was compared to straight up and down. It's really quite amazing. All right, so our building. Well, let's do the same thing with the building. We'll come back here. The building is going to be much gentler. It's not leaning as much. Again, we want more than the building. Copy and paste. So now we have, there's a layer with just our building on it. And I think in this one, we might just be able to get away with doing the transform because it's just a slight tilt to the left. So let's hit Command T on this. Hold down the Command key so we can go in one direction. And let's just straighten out our building a little bit. And want to make sure that the branches line up as well as possible. Maybe the branches, not the clouds. We'll do the clouds afterwards. So there we have a nice straight building. Again, we need to add a mask because we got to fix these clouds in here. In fact, let's zoom in on that. You can see where the break is. We'll get our brush and, whoops, I got too much in there. We'll fix that in a second. Just along the break, just make sure that that disappears. Same thing here. In fact, I'm going to come to 90% just to make it quick. And rather than 100%, the 90% allows things to kind of blend together a little better. All right, so I did a little sloppy editing right there. I'm going to fix that. I'm going to actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a stack of this. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, click on the menu, go to Merge Visible so that I have one that is everything. Let's get the Stamp tool, Alt click in there, and let's get rid of that one. And we'll get rid of whatever that was there. And actually, I don't know if I like that branch at all. Let's just get rid of the branch. Yeah, it's better. I don't even like it. Okay. And you can be as clean as you want with this. Let's just paint it 40% and just have things kind of blend through. Okay. All right. So there we go. Now we obviously, again, have too much sky. Let's just go ahead and crop here while we're in Photoshop. I'm going to bring that down. Again, make kind of a panoramic feel. Bring in from the left just beyond that bench. And a little bit from the right and hit Enter. And I'm going to go ahead and flatten this. And we'll save that and put it back into Lightroom. All right, here's our edited image in Photoshop. And here's the image in Lightroom. And notice how much skinnier the lighthouse looks in Lightroom. This is the Lightroom version. This is the Photoshop version. I happen to know this is a little chubbier lighthouse than Lightroom. Lightroom did make it a little bit too skinny from the vertical stretching that took place. And also notice we do have the perspective issues up on the top. Again, you might be okay with that, but be aware that it did cause a perspective change compared to here, where now everything lines up and our lighthouse got a little bit of its girth back. So there you go. There's the difference between perspective in Lightroom and Photoshop. You just have a lot more control in Photoshop than you do in Lightroom, but the end result is up to you. It all depends on what you like. But I just wanted you to understand better where things happen in Photoshop versus Lightroom concerning perspective. So I hope that was helpful. Try them both, find out which one you like best. You're going to find that some images work fine in Lightroom and some are going to be needing to go into Photoshop for that final edit. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.